I'm Josh Christensen.
I'm Brian Lufkin.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, we talk to head of editorial strategy for Fast Company and Inc., David Lidsky.
The experience of being there and that culture, ultimately, they came to sort of feel like this is not a place that I want to work.
Mike Zatz, who leads global data ecosystem and partnerships at Measurabl.
We were able to convince a lot of people that this is something you should look at and something that you can control, and it represents an actual opportunity.
And as always, keeping tabs.
They released the Best Picture nominees, and it's like, oh crap, now I gotta watch all of these catch up.
But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
For weeks now, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, has been sweeping the Twin Cities with raids and roundups that have upended daily life and led to civilian deaths. And up until recently, Minnesota's biggest companies had largely remained silent. But on Sunday, a day after ICE agents killed Alex Preddy and weeks after they killed Renee Good, over 60 Minnesota-based CEOs collectively published a short public letter via the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Heads of corporations like Target, Best Buy, United Health, 3M, and Land O'Lakes called for, quote, an immediate de-escalation of tensions. But they stopped short of mentioning immigration or condemning the murders of Preddy and Good or saying that ICE should leave the state. Meanwhile, executives of companies beyond Minnesota are also finally starting to break silence as well, albeit at various levels of forcefulness and publicness. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei called what we're witnessing in Minneapolis, quote, a horror on X. The New York Times published a leaked Slack message from Sam Altman sent to OpenAI employees where he said, quote, what's happening with ICE is going too far. And Tim Cook's email to Apple staff was leaked to Bloomberg saying he was, quote, heartbroken by the events in Minneapolis.
Well, Tim Cook would have sent something out sooner, but he had to have his phone off during the Melania documentary.
Wow, that's true. He was there.
That was a crazy thing to me that Saturday night after the killing of Preddy, they just had a showing of the Melania documentary and all of these CEOs were there.
It's
weird.
Very dark. Very dark.
Well, no great way to transition out of that, but let's talk about TikTok. TikTok has finalized a deal to create a new U.S. entity. This officially ends the 6-year limbo the app has been in over whether it would be able to continue operating in America at all. So ByteDance will retain a 20% stake in U.S. TikTok, but the rest is allocated amongst a group of investors, including Oracle, private equity firm Silver Lake, and Emirati investment firm MGX. In the days after the deal, app users and creators began reporting glitches, which TikTok blamed on a power outage at one of their data centers. Creators also alleged censorship of videos criticizing ICE and CBP operations in Minnesota following the killing of Alex Preddy.
TikTok has had quite the journey.
Yeah. The will they, won't they of the century. It's the tech industry's Ross and Rachel.
Amazon announced on Wednesday it's laying off 16,000 employees. The company says that it wants to strengthen its business, quote, by reducing layers, increasing ownership, and removing bureaucracy. But at the same time, it said that it would continue hiring in, quote, strategic areas, whatever that means. But speaking of Amazon, UPS is going to cut about 30,000 jobs this year because they expect to be delivering fewer Amazon packages. Meanwhile, Nike is laying off hundreds of employees at 2 Memphis distribution centers, largely due to increased automation, and Pinterest is cutting its staff by around 15% and allocating their resources to teams working on AI.
Yeah, it's rough. This,
Ooh.
I think...
Awkward face emoji.
What were the... 2025 had some pretty high layoff numbers overall.
I believe it was the most since 2020 pandemic era.
Yeah, that's not great. Well, speaking
really
of
bad.
not great, U.S. consumer confidence fell to its lowest level since 2014. The Conference Board announced on Tuesday that the confidence index for January declined 9.7 points to a reading of 84.5. If you don't know what those numbers mean at all, it basically means that people feel less hopeful about their financial present and future than they did during the recession caused by the pandemic. So what's causing this dip? Well, the usual suspects: inflation, tariffs, unemployment, and politics.
Now, Josh, what is the level of your consumer confidence right now?
Oh, Jesus Christ. In my own personal finances, in terms of how much I spend on online shopping, low confidence in myself, high confidence.
Oh, I have no confidence in myself.
Yeah.
I need, look, here's the thing. Me and access to the Nintendo eStore.
Yeah, that'll kill you.
That's really bad. Like, I'm going to need like parental controls like it's 1993 all over again.
You need to just like get a friend or a parent to just control your
I need
spending.
to patch mom and dad back in. I need to get them the password to my Nintendo account.
Oh my God.
Because I can't trust myself. And these, ever since COVID, I feel like nothing has been a normal price ever again. By the way, I think this was like 2 or 3 years ago, because here in New York, we've got Mr. Softy ice cream truck. Yeah. Okay. When I moved to New York, this thing was like $1 or something, maybe not $1. I don't know, like $2. Okay. It is like $7.50 now for the most ultra processed, probably costs like 2 cents to make soft serve ice cream. And it's still like $1 zillion. And I feel like
$2 to make, but it is being imported from Turkey. So,
True. That's true.
That was an Eric Adams deal.
Right. I need to remind myself of what his supply chain situation was. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that consumer confidence is this low.
Next.
Apple is going to be relying on Google's Gemini for powering its AI features, according to Bloomberg. The partnership means Apple will be using Google's Gemini models for its future AI technology. Bloomberg reports that Gemini is going to be powering the next Siri model set to launch in February.
And finally, one last quick news item. The Fed once again did not lower rates. And if you haven't been paying attention, Trump wants those rates lowered. It's been a big point of contention between him and Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who also, as a reminder, Jerome Powell is being investigated over allegedly misleading Congress about the cost of Fed building renovations. He made a whole video about it. We've talked about this before. Anyways, he's not caving to the pressure and still isn't lowering rates. Although, it should also be noted, Jerome Powell is not responsible for lowering rates alone. There's other people who vote on that as well.
It's not just him with like a red button someplace.
I wish it was.
In Jerome's lair, dorm room.
Interest rate daddies. Interest rate.
By the way,
dungeon.
the Fed. I wasn't aware of Fed building renovations. I knew about the White House like demolition. This is a separate thing.
Oh yeah, the Fed's being renovated for years and years and years. That's, I don't really know. I'm not going to pay attention to the ins and outs of architectural design.
I was about to say
we'll leave that to Liz Stinson and Mark Wilson.
Right, our trusted colleagues. It seems like there's a lot of like reno happening inside the Beltway recently.
God, it's going to be a nightmare to live there right now.
Oh man.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Bryan.
Yes.
What is the most environmentally friendly thing you have done, like made a change in your life? Like, I'm going to buy an electric car. I stopped drinking almond milk to save water and switched to... what have you done that is environmentally friendly?
Okay, well, I do... First of all, I want to give a shout out to all the millennials listening. Because if you're a millennial like me, you probably grew up, with RIP, Sesame Street is not RIP, but PBS is no longer with us as of recently. There was a sketch on Sesame Street, and I invite all listeners to look this up on YouTube. It was a song about don't waste water, and that always stuck with me. I think there is a clip from this video that my friend always references as well. People who leave the water running as they're brushing their teeth. This is drilled into my head too. Like, water conservation is such a thing for, I think, millennials and Gen Xers because there were so many PSAs and children television about it. It's what I think is kind of like corrupted this whole conversation around like resources that data centers use for AI. Yeah.
Like, everyone's like, they're using a bunch of water. They are using a bunch of water. And on an absolute scale, like, yeah, they're using more water. But relatively speaking, water's not the biggest problem of what data centers are using. It's electricity.
Yeah.
But I think it's just because we grew up being like, you're going to destroy the planet if you don't shut off the water while you're brushing your teeth.
And there would be like cartoons in these PSAs where you see like there's like a fish out in there's like a pond outside the house, and the kid's like brushing his teeth while the water running, and the water's going down. The fish is just like he's like headed toward a really bad dry place. Also, remember we had to save the whales as millennials.
Save the whales was a big thing.
Did we do that? Are the whales saved yet?
I think they're still around.
They're still around.
I think whales are still kicking. Ozone layer.
Well, because I was gonna say because that
ozone layer
went
seems
away.
Okay.
Yeah, the hole in the ozone layer went away, right?
That's nice. We did it, y'all.
The millennials did it, you guys.
Job done.
Done. We're good.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
George W. Bush mission accomplished.
Yes. Yep.
And for another millennial reference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, hey, you know what? This is. Anyway, to answer your question, I try not to waste water.
Great. That seems very vague. I'm sure you're doing a great job.
Yeah. All I'm saying is my house is never going to have that cartoon pond with the fish. Like, all of a sudden, his lake is dry and now he's flopping around on dry land. That's not going to happen.
God, what I wouldn't give for a koi pond.
I would love a koi pond. Well, you know what? I save so much water, I should just actually use that to build my own koi pond.
Yeah, there you go. Municipal water or groundwater? Depends. That makes a difference.
That's reusing, though. Reduce, reuse, recycle. I'm reusing there.
RECYCLE, recycle.
Okay, by the way, we did not plan this at all. Okay, this is like when we found out that we were traders.
This is the most
bros.
Millennial podcast.
Yeah, and by the way, that episode, for those who don't know,
Rocco's Modern Life episode.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people who are over 35 right now who just broke out into song.
Okay, but that show was so, can I cuss on this show?
Yeah, you can.
This show was so fucking weird, but I had a lot of friends who weren't allowed to watch Rocco. It was like Rocco and Ren and Stimpy.
Yeah, there was the era of like gross out animation, like kind of like precursors to like Cow and Chicken, the
Cow
sort
and
of
Chicken
like
was good.
Cartoon Network
Okay, do you
stuff.
remember
but it wasn't adult. It was for kids.
Oh, but it was certainly
dark and weird.
Oh yeah, the name of the fried chicken place they would eat at is called the Choky Chicken.
Yeah,
come on. Now what Josh was referencing, there was a whole recycle special where they told us the value of environmentalism.
Yeah.
But it was like a musical, and Rocco didn't know any of the songs, and everybody was like, Rocco, we had rehearsals. They gaslit him. Rocco's a wallaby, by the way. They gaslit Rocco, the anthropomorphic wallaby, that he missed all the rehearsals for our environmental musical numbers.
Yeah. It was a commentary on the amount of conservation
and you know what
we
else?
had been fed.
You know what else? Hey, Josh, you know what else? You can't fight City Hall.
Yeah, that's there.
You can't fight City Hall. You can't fight corporate America.
We gotta get out of this.
I mean, look, I'll talk about Rocco all day.
This is an episode of hard transitions from Rocco's Modern Life to what we're talking about today, which is Palantir. This is probably one of the most mysterious and polarizing companies in the United States. But regardless of how you feel about Palantir, its influence is undeniable, particularly if you count up just how many former employees have started their own companies, which is exactly what Fast Company's head of editorial strategy, David Lidsky, did. David joined Bryan and I to discuss his reporting on the growing Palantir mafia. Hey, David, welcome back to the show.
Josh, thanks for having me.
This is the first time you've been on MIC in a little while. I think since your, we'll call it a sabbatical at the Ankler.
My gap year, indeed. I was on talking about Saudi money in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Wow, is that?
While you were an Ankler editor, but now you're back.
Year or so ago.
Back at Fast Company and at Inc. You've been on our Inc. podcast. And now you're back on MIC where you belong.
That's right. I'm circling back, too. That's a podcast universe thing for the Inc. and Fast Company super fans.
Okay, so disclaimer up front, as everyone heard in the intro, this is a story about Palantir. There's lots of thoughts and feelings about Palantir as a company and the zeitgeist right now.
Do people have strong feelings about Palantir? I didn't come up in my reporting.
For those hoping that we are going to spend our time editorializing about Palantir, this is not the segment for you, but there may be plenty of other stuff that is of interest to you in this segment. But there may be some people who don't know what Palantir is or know what Palantir is and don't actually know what they do, which is a little harder to describe than you might think. So let's just give a rundown right now of what is Palantir, what does Palantir do?
Palantir at core is a software company that sells to enterprises and governments. And what does Palantir do? Question is a chestnut that many journalistic and other enterprises have sought to answer. And frankly, it's actually not that hard.
Wired made it seem very hard,
yes,
I will say that.
In its simplest form, every organization has a myriad of data, right? They have structured data, things like spreadsheets. They have unstructured data, things like emails or documents or audio, like this very podcast. And they live all over the place, right? And no one sort of has everything, in one simple repository. So Palantir builds software that helps those kind of organizations, typically large organizations, analyze all those different types of data, bring them together in a way that allows those folks to, make decisions more quickly and, solve a particular problem in their business. The thing that often comes up, which is often where the fun begins, is that Palantir does not collect data. A lot of people think it does. What it does is, it helps its customers manage the data that they have. Again, this is generally misunderstood, and that's part of why people have so many opinions about Palantir, which, we can get into, yes.
Yeah, and they have, a range of different clients from banks to independent companies to government
the majority
contracts.
of its business, I believe, is government work, but the commercial sector, I believe it's over 30% and growing particularly quickly. So it is distributed across those two big categories.
So let's get into the crux of the story itself. Palantir has a very long history of generating founders, essentially.
In large part, my mission was, however you feel about it, I'm not here to tell you that you don't have a right to whatever feelings you have, about the company. And I looked at it, or thought about it from the perspective of both, people who support its mission in service of governments and defense work and intelligence agencies, which not a lot of love out there for defense contractors often, but there are some. And then for people who are critics, even just on its face for, even if they don't understand what Palantir does, but just as a defense contractor. And then, as a public company stock, it went public in 2020. It sort of has become not quite a meme stock, but, has a large base of retail investors, and they have kind of created a bit of additional fandom and mystique around, the company in addition to the mystique that the company itself cultivates. And that has driven the stock, it's down a bit in 2026, about 10%, but it's still trading, its market cap, I checked before we're recording, still about $400 million, which is effectively about 100 times revenue, which is a lot. And so there are people who just, in thinking about it as a financial investment, see it as, wildly overvalued or indicative of at least sort of an individual bubble as a company, largely, part of the AI bubble, but not solely about that. So all of that to say that people are coming at it from these different points of view. And my goal was to sort of try to go one level deeper and say, well, why do you even have these feelings? Like, how has it become so important and successful such that you can hold, these strong opinions, however you've formed them? And to me, that really came down to, the fact that, the company is exceedingly good at, hiring talent, particularly young talent, and then putting them in a position to take on a lot of extreme ownership, a project, often, again, at a very young age or early in their career.
How is Palantir attracting this much talent from the jump, really?
Yeah. So I think that by and large, I would say, it really comes down to, two things. And that is, one, mission. And I think it's important to, understand that the mission is a little bit of a choose your own adventure, for those folks, such that, there are people who definitely are attracted to, the national security, defense work. It's very interesting to talk to people who you might, like, in your mind, profile as, having a certain political valence or what have you. They're in an urban environment. They, might, generally, are not white males, whatever. And, they just flat out tell, I was really, animated by, the idea of working on national security. And you just go, it's good to get out of your bubble a little bit, right? And so, so that's one. But also, there are people who are focused on, like, I'm very technical and I want to solve, like, really hard problems. And those problems could be in the insurance industry or in, finance, or oil and gas is another example that came up. And that was what motivated them. And it was less about the subject matter and more just about like being able to immerse themselves in something in which they didn't necessarily know that much, but they could learn it, wanted to learn it in service of trying to solve this problem. So the mission, very important. And then the other, again, is having that ability to like just, you start, you're given like a little bit of a test project for like a week. And then, very quickly you're thrown into some kind of mission. Even people who aren't like in the implementation teams, which are the teams that sort of go out and work very closely with customers, people who like worked in finance told me like, yeah, they gave me a project and I had to like go figure it out. So they sort of put you in these positions where you have a lot of autonomy, a lot of ownership, and it's your job to figure out what the problem is for the customer and solve that problem. And the people who are attuned to that kind of mindset tend to really thrive there and learn a lot. And that process is very much kind of a little simulacrum of running a startup, but within the infrastructure of, this larger company in Palantir, such that they reach a point, they decide they want to leave. They have a lot of the skills in place and they've been honed to go start a company.
Bryan, you run our work life section here, so it's like slight detour into your lane here. Like how much?
This was secretly a work life story.
So much of this is.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be a detour. It can just be a marked off ramp. Exit here for work life. Because I feel like, this is such an interesting company. Well, what were you about to say, Josh?
Well, I was just going to ask about that autonomy question in terms of I don't know how many stories we've written in the work life section about when employees feel like, oh, they're actually contributing, shocker, they like working at that company.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I want to ask you about, David, because I feel like, you're right. I feel like, especially nowadays, so many workers, they want to work at a place that aligns with their values and stuff, right? And I feel like a place that gives them a lot of autonomy, I can imagine how that could be a big appeal. Could you talk a little bit more about what else about this company attracts people to work there? I mean, because you were talking about kind of the mystique earlier, even though name
known
is
as a very
Palantir.
Secretive company, at least has that reputation.
Yes, and for some people, I think more because I talked to a lot of people who joined the company in the early to mid 2010s when Palantir was far less known, and a lot of people just admitted I didn't really know much about the company. But as one person said, they were in college and all the companies would come on campus and Google okay, I know what they do, and Facebook now, Meta, I get it, I know what they do. And Palantir was the only one that was they sort of bought into the mystique, of the company as it's sort of having some of the appeal. So I do think there was some value there. And there's also, that does extend to, certainly the commercial customers, as well as, again, one source, told me a funny story of you're an executive at a big bank and you need to buy some sort of, kind of database optimization software. And, you have a choice of meeting some, anonymous CEO, that you've probably never heard of, or meeting Palantir CEO Alex Karp, who is a, big character. And, and they're oh, Palantir, right? They work with the CIA and stuff, right? Well, which meeting are you going to take? So
do you want to work with the square in the suit or the dude with the sword?
Yeah, exactly. So, yes. So the mystique does, I think sort of play to their favor both with employees. And I think now sort of in the more, since they went public and have become much more known, at least for some people, the cult of personality around Alex Karp and just the company at large, they have merch and all that stuff, that they're really trying to sort of play up, that, I'm sure that
if I see you in a Palantir merch.
I don't have there's a top executive who I seem to have a signature color and they have sweatshirts in that color.
It's what did they do to you while you were reporting the story, David?
Don't worry about it.
I have to ask. So for this story, you really focused on these alumni, and you notably didn't talk to Palantir by for a reason for this story. But have you ever met Alex Karp?
I have, and so about 10 years ago or so, I used to I would take these trips out west. I'd try to just meet as many companies as I could, and San Francisco, Los Angeles, and I was going out to the Bay Area, and I was just thinking about who can I meet and whatever, and I'd reached out to Palantir, and I'd gotten a meeting with just the comps chief, and they were in Palo Alto at the time, and had a perfectly nice meeting, and seemed to be about over, and then she's oh, hey, let me see if Alex is available, and next thing you know, I'm in, everyone calls him, you can tell sort of where people kind of got on board by what they call him. So anyone who sort of is a little older, worked there in the 2010s or even before, just call him Carp. And then people who are younger, who maybe only in the last couple of years, call him Dr. Carp, which is sort of a new affectation. He does have a PhD. It's a little, given a little, the Jill Biden energy. But,
yeah, it's a lot of Dr. Jill Biden energy.
He's not a medical doctor. But anyway, so, so I'm in the office with Carp, who I insist on just calling Alex for what it's worth. But, he had also gone to law school. And I went to law school. And I had this very, in the first probably half of the meeting, I felt like I was in law school, the Socratic method, where you're sort of on the spot and you're being asked these sort of very intense questions and you have to answer it, and you keep getting asked ever more intense questions. I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. What's going on? and then at some point I did kind of turn them around a bit, and things, soften in part basically by going, everyone says Palantir is so secretive, but I don't know. I looked online. I saw a lot of papers and stuff that sort of try to explain how the software works. And yeah, he was very animated about that. And then at one point I noticed in the corner of his office was just a bunch of giant kettlebells, right? And so, I don't remember. It must have been 45 kilograms, which is, a lot. Those are, it's 100 pounds.
A decent amount of kettle.
So I asked him about them, and he's like, oh, I don't even use them. I was like, but then why are there 50, not 50, but there are 20 kettlebells in the corner? Why are there 20 kettlebells in the corner?
By looking at Alex Carp, it's clear he doesn't use them.
So he starts telling me that, no, what he's really into is Tai Chi, and next thing I know, he is, and we're not on video. I could get up, but I don't want to ruin the audio. But and even if I did it, could be an HR violation. But basically, he gets up and he stands behind me and he starts to physically move my body around to show me Tai Chi moves. And so I am being physically manipulated by the CEO of Palantir.
So in this situation, he's Patrick Swayze.
And I have never had, I'm like, this is
he is a doctor.
Weirdest,
he should be allowed to
this is the weirdest CEO meeting I have ever had, right? And to date, that still stands. Yeah, that has nothing to do with why I didn't reach out to Palantir on this. I very much wanted to sort of take the look from the outside in, and use this network of alums turned founders to tell the story. And, and in general, Palantir, again, they have, again, as a public company and whatever, they do cooperate more, with certain projects and certain outlets. But I just didn't really see that as sort of the way I wanted to pursue it. And so I worked around it, but by all means, I'm sure, Dr. Carp, please, reach out and, we can talk. That's right.
So back to the sort of talent acquisition part of this, and we don't need to go super deep into the nitty gritty of how many interviews do they have? How do they do that? But generally, what are they looking for when they hire people?
Sure.
And, how does that differ from other companies?
In a word, I would say it's grit. They really seem to be focused on, people who can be put in these literally, extreme environments, I'm, asking people about, different deployments, that they had. And again, people often can't tell you who the client was or sort of the exact nature of the work, but they can tell you I was 23 and I was in the desert and I had to set up servers in the desert with no power. And that was part of my job. Or, there were two of us and we were in Singapore. And, and you're like, okay, well, how'd you manage that? So they need people who can handle being in those kind of embedded with the customer and, and again, having not, they're not going to be hey, let me just run the, they're not running it by their manager to make sure whatever's okay. They're there to, solve the problem. So they have to have that intrinsic motivation, to use the Silicon Valley jargon right now, the high agency.
So roughly 10% of alumni from the company go on to found their own companies. High rate, I think we've talked pretty well about what they're doing within that company, encouraging an entrepreneurial mindset, giving people a lot of agency. You can see how that would lead to people being well suited to go out and start their own companies. But when they go out and start their own companies, what is that relationship with Palantir after that point?
So for a long time, this barely existed as a thing.
Yeah.
And then I do think that, yes, there was a sort of a, I talked to a lot of these people. There were a cadre of people who worked there in the mid-2010s, which is basically exactly at the time that they went from basically having either more or less no product to sort of very kind of janky product to then finally, mature. Their flagship product is called Foundry. And the people who worked on, that in whatever form definitely learned a lot and whatever. So they're, and again, like I said, they went public in 2020. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who started to kind of go out around 5-6 years ago and start the company, pandemic. Some of it was just I left to start the company. And then a week later, everything, everything went sideways. But, and then it did accelerate in the last several years. And I think in part, again, it is, Palantir's success and Palantir being more of a badge. And certainly I'm sure, to a degree, people being able to cash out, their stock options and, having a bit of a cushion and, to be able to then start something. I think as Palantir has, become more successful, as its product has become better and better, it seems like everything ostensibly could be solved by Palantir and its software, that, the company's stance is, evolving, let's say, a little bit. And there were a couple of instances last year where Palantir did sue founding teams, accusing them of stealing trade secrets or, violating their agreements relating to, poaching, employees. And so one of them resolved itself, settled. The other one, I believe, is ongoing. So there's a little bit of a sense that Palantir is less excited about people leaving to go start companies. But that said, there's no external signs as yet of that slowing down. And in fact, even in just the, less than a week, from the time we're talking, publishing the story, I've had, a couple people reached out with I'm about to launch, company and, and so, someone I talked to who, their job is just to invest in these companies.
That was another thing I wanted to get into. You talked to a couple of VCs.
Yeah, and there are actually others that have a lot of investments in the Palantir universe.
VC funds basically essentially focus on...
it shows you, again, the power of the network and the caliber of the people coming out of it. But one of the people whose job is just to invest in these folks, was just if Palantir was going to do it, or if you could do it at Palantir, then just stay at Palantir and do it. So you really do have to think through the problem you want to solve and make sure it's not something that is going to put you in any kind of trouble that way, if you will.
Did any of the alums that you spoke to, David, or they spoke off the record about this, but, it sounds like, they get all this great experience, and they go on to become founders after working at Palantir, but did any of them have any feelings about the reasons why it might be a polarizing company, ties to defense contractors, or Peter Thiel is one of the co-founders? Did they, wrestle with that or talk about that with you in any way?
Yeah, there were people who did like the belief that the company, at least when they were there, did encourage dissent and, a variety of points of view, and that, that the person felt like that the experience of being there and that culture, ultimately, they came to sort of feel like this is not a place that I want to work any longer, and they left. So, I would say that there are people who, even if they have generally a very, they feel good about their experience, they know they learned a lot, and they're positively disposed to, the experience they have, that they can still be critical of the company, in some way. One of my sources told me the story of being there during the first Trump administration and working on something that was controversial and that did find its way into the headlines, and people saying, Palantir is responsible for this horrible thing that's, happening. And it was well, I'm in charge of it. I know what we're doing. And I believe that there was a significant gap between what you were reading and what I knew we were doing. So it's just a useful thing to keep in mind of there's just a lot that often you don't know. And so I tried to stay out of things that I can't prove, or that a lot of people are just kind of speculating. And that was my goal.
People contain multitudes. Companies also contain multitudes. Yeah. I remember when I was back at WNYC, and we still do this here as well. We did a lot
very
of
polarized.
WNYC, public radio, super polar. Actually, public radio is very polarizing in a lot of ways. It's been constantly a cause du jour of
Bring
the
up
right. Too.
Brian Lehrer and Polite Company, and you don't know what's going to happen.
But we were covering a lot of McKinsey stuff during the first Trump term because they did some consulting around the immigration and stuff like that. And I think it's just so interesting because, knowing a little bit about McKinsey and how they structure, it's so siloed isn't the right word, but it's pretty siloed. There are people working on things that are very much you can criticize at McKinsey, but then like a bunch of other people are just like doing stuff like, I don't know, consulting David Zaslav on how to go from HBO to HBO Max to Max and back to HBO Max for $150 million. But that's another story.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing with Palantir, it seems. And I think the description that one of your sources had of an authoritarian democracy where like Dr. Karp, Tai Chi coach Dr. Karp, is...
I did take a couple of Tai Chi classes after that. I really was trying to like live the dream.
We're going to put a pin in that.
But it didn't stick. It didn't stick. It was me and a lot of...
That's the follow-up
a lot
story.
of seniors.
How Dr. Karp, Palantir's Dr. Karp turned into a Tai Chi.
How I became a Tai Chi master.
I can't say Dr. Karp without thinking that this is
Alex
some...
Karp, CEO of Palantir.
Dr. Karp does seem like some like generic off-brand like topical
Dr. Karp's
cream.
miracle.
Well, it
Dr.
also just
Dr.
enhances the mystique of,
It does.
like, I'm going to be this, sort of shadowy figure. But anyway, yes, your question.
Well, yeah, just about kind of this is the authoritarian democracy sort of thing, like made sense of like it is Dr. Karp's company. It is like that sort of authoritarian structure that a lot of founder, CEO, cult of personalities have. But then within a project,
there was so much freedom
basis,
within it, the democracy part, that was, again, I can't speak to like if it's like this right this second, but basically I had so many examples of people telling me like, yeah, they wanted me to work on government stuff. And I was like, I just came from that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that people, hey, you have certain skills and we're really helpful with a certain set of clients. Oh, yeah, but I said I wasn't going to do commercial work. Oh, okay. So, yeah, it's very, like part of you is like, well, how does, like, I don't know. Like, no one, I've never heard of a company that would work like that. But they make it work.
Yeah, and not to excuse like very real criticisms of Palantir overall, but I think sometimes when I think about, maybe this is a really cynical view of companies overall, but like there's a lot of bad in a lot of different companies and a lot of good in a lot of different companies. Like, Google has defense contracts.
In fact,
AI
worked in fast company for a long time before my aforementioned gap year. If you go looking for like perfection, you will find yourself disappointed all the time.
Yeah.
And so, you do have to accept that to a degree, there are always going to be shades of gray and things that you have to decide, like, am I okay with that? Am I not okay with that?
Yeah.
And that applies across every single company.
But if they were at the showing of the Melania documentary, fuck them.
Well, I haven't seen it, so I don't want to, maybe it's great.
Let's wrap up this segment. I think like I'll give you kind of like the last words on this story, David, basically about like big picture influence that Palantir and through this Palantir mafia has had on the industry at large. Kind of your final thoughts on this story.
Sure. My goal was that, and this is an idea that I remember doing a story about Apple probably, 15 plus years ago, where Apple was like super hot and everyone company was like, oh, we're the Apple of X. And it's like, do you even know what that means? And, like, do you even do you have any understanding of like how Apple operates in a way that like got it to this point? And like, I don't want to wear that. I just want I just want a badge, put on my sweater, say I'm the Apple of X. And so that, I feel like there is a measure of that with Palantir because it's successful, because it sort of has a ardent fan base you would not necessarily, expect, because of its stock price success. And, companies see that, they see all those different elements that they think are aspects of why Palantir is successful, and they want to emulate that, but again, they don't really understand it. So my hope was to really try to get to that and sort of be like like there are it's not about like a job title like forward deployed engineer, which is bandied about and very popular in terms of spreading through corporate America, but like you don't have to have that job title, you don't have to sort of copy some of these other things. There are these sort of ideas below that, in terms of like, how can I get as close to the customer and the problem that they're trying to solve as I can, and then like really be focused on like giving, my customers, the sort of positive result that, they're seeking, and, in doing so, like giving the people who work for me, like the kind of freedom to do this and having faith in them and hiring people, with a very, sort of high bar and and focus in that way, then like other companies can copy that, and I think that was, largely what I'm hoping to get across with this.
Okay, we'll be back with David and Bryan for Keeping Tabs. But first, a quick break followed by Kristin Toussaint's interview with Mike Zatz, Senior Vice President and Head of Global Data Ecosystem and Partnerships at Measurabl. So I live in New York City. And if you live in a New York City or another big metropolitan area, you might be like me and walk around and look up at all the big buildings. Or if I rarely, God forbid, end up in Times Square, I look around and think, Jesus Christ, how much energy are these buildings using? And if you're like me, then we've got a guest for you. So Kristin Toussaint talked to Mike Zatz, who spent nearly 2 decades leading the commercial building side of Energy Star, which is a voluntary program run by the United States EPA. Recently, he joined Measurabl, which is a widely adopted sustainability data management platform, to work on global data ecosystems and partnerships. Measurabl is essentially like the private sector equivalent of Energy Star in a lot of ways. Kristin and Mike talked about all things energy efficiency and real estate across the U.S. and internationally, and what are some small steps people and organizations can take to be more energy efficient relatively quickly. Here's that conversation.
Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Kristin. It's very nice to be here. Thanks.
So before we get into talking about your career and your current work, I wanted to set the scene a little bit for our listeners. We're going to be talking a lot about energy efficiency and sustainability data benchmarking for buildings and sort of all these terms. And I just want to hear really quickly from you, like, what does that all really mean and why is this important?
Well, when we look at real estate, at buildings, they are responsible for a lot of the energy use in the United States and a lot of the emissions. I think a lot of estimates are that the built environment is responsible for about 30 to 40% of emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. And utility bills are going higher. We all know that from the bills that we pay for our homes. So there's a lot of sort of win-win opportunities in working on all of those fun things, right? Benchmarking, energy management plans, and efforts to reduce energy use in buildings. Those who are in those buildings or operate those buildings are going to save a lot of money, hopefully, if they do the work well. And everybody's going to benefit from reduced greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants, frankly. So the environment's going to benefit as well.
I can imagine many of us enter these buildings, but we don't really think of all that stuff going on behind the scenes. Who's really sort of tracking this data? Is it like landlords, corporations, whoever runs a building?
Hopefully somebody's tracking it, and it hasn't always been the case. Several decades ago, very few people were tracking it. In fact, it was just considered a part of doing business, an uncontrollable expense, that you run a building and you just pay the utility bills, whatever they are. But through all the work that we did over the years with Energy Star, and I know we'll get into that a bit more, we were able to convince a lot of people that this is something you should look at and something that you can control, and it represents an actual opportunity. So, fast forward to today, and I think there's a lot of people tracking it. The literal tracking is happening really with the building managers primarily and the building owners. They're the ones that receive that data. Really, whoever gets the utility bills, they're the ones doing the tracking in the first place. And then sometimes the tenants in larger buildings as well are doing their own tracking for what they use in their spaces, depending on the setup of the building. So there's a lot of different people interested in. And then, of course, there's a lot of people who are not the owners and the managers and the tenants who are interested in what that data says. So while they're not doing the tracking, they're receiving a lot of the data in the end.
Can tell me a little bit more about that? Like, who's looking at this data? Who's considering it?
I think probably one of the simplest examples is a bit of a phenomenon or a trend that started, I think it was about maybe 15 years ago now, where a number of cities and states were looking at ways to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And when they looked at what the sources of those emissions were in the city, let's say, they found that while nationally, I mentioned that there's about 30 to 40% of emissions come from buildings. In urban environments, it can be more like 70 to 80% because there's fewer cars, which are the next largest source of emissions. So I think as some of these policymakers were looking at, hey, how can we reduce the emissions in our city? They had to focus on buildings. And then they were like, okay, well, how are we going to do that? We don't control the buildings. And I like to think that we in Energy Star were out there promoting this idea of benchmarking of energy use. And we did have a lot of people using our software tool and companies doing it for their own use. And so I think the cities maybe took a page out of that book and said, hey, well, maybe we can just pass some requirements on larger buildings in particular to go ahead and benchmark them and assess how much energy they're using. And then maybe we can have them report it back to us and we can see what's going on and we can work on programs to reduce the energy use and then see how much we can reduce over time. So that's just one example. But, that started with just a couple of cities and states. And now fast forward to today, and we're up to, I think, about over 50 jurisdictions across the United States that have some sort of what we call an energy benchmarking law for commercial buildings.
So like you said, you spent nearly 2 decades working on this Energy Star within the EPA before moving to Measurabl, where you are now. What originally drew you to this work? Obviously, you care so much about sustainability in general, but tell me a little bit about, what brought you there and what kept you at Energy Star for so long.
Yeah, I do come from a sustainability background. I've worked on sustainability for all but 2 of my 30 plus years of my career. And now I'm with a prop tech company, a software company. So different, but one that focuses on sustainability. And I think what really attracted me to Energy Star, I've been lucky through my whole career, all but those 2 of those years, to have worked at what I would call the intersection of business and the environment. I come from this environmental sustainability background, but I think there's a lot of aspects to environmentalism and to finding the solutions. And for me, it's a really great place to be because we can come up as environmentalists with all the things that we want everybody to do, whether it's people or companies or whatever, but we're not the ones that can make it happen. In this case, it's the businesses that need to make something happen. It's the owners of the buildings, it's the managers of the buildings, it's the occupants of the buildings. They're the ones that actually do something, no matter what policies we come up with or ideas we come up with. And that's not always an easy thing, though, to find the win-win situations that are going to benefit everybody. They're going to benefit the businesses and also benefit the environment. And that's where my whole career has been, really. And so I spent the first 15 years of my career in environmental consulting. I was doing all international work primarily. Got lucky to travel around the world, doing a lot of work in Asia on helping factories reduce their use of ozone-depleting chemicals. So again, the intersection of business and the environment.
Tell me about why you made that transition.
Yeah, I'll be totally honest. I was at the EPA for 22 years total and 19 with Energy Star. And full disclosure, I was not actually planning to leave ever. Well, I was planning to leave sometime. I wasn't planning to leave until I fully retired, reached whatever age I decided that I was going to retire at. That was still a few years from now, but I enjoyed the work and my colleagues and the people in the industry that I was working with. And we had a lot of success. So I was moving along and, the winds have changed a bit, as they do in the U.S. When you become a government employee, a public servant, you sign on to work for the government and your leadership changes every 4 or 8 years, typically. And when leadership changes, policies change, and you sign up to go with that. It can be challenging, certainly sometimes. And, in this case, I think there were a lot of challenges that were facing the program. There were still a lot of opportunities, though. And I think, as we all know, there were buyouts essentially offered to government employees and a lot of agencies. And so it was a tough decision, but I felt like I had done a lot of great work at Energy Star and at EPA. And there were a lot of great opportunities out there in the private sector or nonprofit sectors as well that I might want to pursue for the remainder of my career. So I made the hard decision to take them up on one of those offers and decided to retire early from the EPA.
I was looking at Energy Star's scope for commercial buildings. Last year, I believe there were more than 330,000 buildings, making up nearly a quarter of all commercial building floor space in the U.S. under Energy Star's Portfolio Manager program. That is a lot of buildings. How do you get to that scale? How do you get that many buildings on board with this?
Yeah. It is a lot of buildings, but it's also not a lot of buildings. If you look at the survey that we actually used in Energy Star as the basis for a lot of our Energy Star, how we assess buildings, there are about, I think it's 7 million buildings in the United States, believe it or not, commercial buildings. And so 300, I think we were up to, when I left, about closer to 350 or 370,000. It is an awful lot, but still a long way to go, obviously. How did we get to that? It wasn't easy, and it took a while. The program has been around in its current form for about 25 years. And I think there were a couple of inflection points. When it first started in about 1999, up until I would say about 2008, it was sort of a very niche program. That's how I describe it. That was back in that time when people just viewed utilities as an uncontrollable expense in the building. So we were very much working just with the leaders, those who saw an opportunity there, those who wanted to work on energy efficiency or environmental protection, really just some of the larger leading companies. So that's why I would call it sort of a niche program. And it was the time when the green building movement was sort of starting up too. And you had LEED certification come on the scene from the U.S. Green Building Council, which is a large nonprofit. But that brought the focus to new construction. And we were working pretty much only with existing buildings, primarily with existing buildings. And we couldn't get people's attention. It was very hard because all that focus was on new construction. And then in 2000, my theory, in 2008, we saw a big uptake, 2008, 2009. And I think it's because that's when we hit the Great Recession. And a lot of construction stopped at that point. But yet, it is the time also where some of these jurisdictions and some others were looking for ways to start reducing emissions and reducing energy use. And so I think it naturally shifted people to what we had been pitching all along. Let's look at the existing buildings. Hey, this is our best opportunity. There's a lot of them, and they're here right now. They're not coming in the future. So that was one inflection point. The next one, I think, was a few years later when New York and California started with these benchmarking laws. And from there, I think just the interest, both voluntary and mandatory, just continued to grow. And a big part of that, I think, is something that we set up, which is really essentially an ecosystem that built up around our portfolio manager software tool. And more importantly, around the data that was in it. That once there was a lot of data in our system, it became an easy way for anybody who needed that data to find it. And it introduced a lot of benefits that helped to streamline all manner of sort of transactions in the real estate industry. And that then, I think, fostered further growth, and it sort of snowballed from there.
You brought up something there that I think hints at how complex this is, right? Which is that many of these building managers might own properties in different jurisdictions that are subject to different regulations or requirements. It just seems like a lot to handle or a lot to look at once.
So consider that if you're a building owner that has buildings in 30 different jurisdictions, it's quite possible today, if they're major cities, that all 30 of them have a benchmarking law. And maybe a dozen of those also have what's called a building performance standard, which goes a step further. A benchmarking law simply requires you to assess your energy use and report it back to the city or state. A building performance standard is the next level. It's putting caps on the amount of energy that buildings can use or the amount of emissions that they can generate. And if you don't meet those caps by certain dates, you owe fines, penalties. So if you have buildings in 30 different jurisdictions, unfortunately, these laws are all different. And there's a big movement out there with a lot of organizations supporting it and a lot of the building owners supporting it to try to bring more consistency to those laws. That's a bit harder because the laws are made by the policymakers and they'll want a lot of different things. There's a little progress being made, but at a minimum, even if the laws differ, if they can all tap into that same common data set and use the same definitions of things, that still makes things easier for the building owners who have to comply with all those laws. And that's another thing that helped to build up the value of the data in Portfolio Manager and Portfolio Manager as a tool was that the building owners supported it. Whenever a new law would be proposed, they would say, look, whether we support or don't support this law, if you're going to pass it, use Portfolio Manager as the data set that we have to report because it's already there and we don't have to start using other tools.
I can imagine this gets even more complicated when you look internationally, and your title at Measurabl is Global Data Ecosystems and Partnerships. Tell me about what that means and how Measurabl is expanding this work beyond North America, which is Energy Star's focus.
It definitely is more complicated, and I am really just starting down that path right now. Measurabl does have a more broad presence than in North America. It is our biggest market in North America, but we have a sizable presence in Europe as well, which is really the next biggest market, and also some work in Asia and Australia in particular, though that's a bit smaller. I think a lot of opportunities there, though, to grow with some of the things that are happening in Australia in particular. There are just a lot of complexities, and some of those, I'll be honest, I'm learning as I've joined the company now, because as you mentioned, Energy Star, it wasn't really our mission. I come from a background in my consulting life before Energy Star where I was doing all international work. and I absolutely loved it. I actually lived in Thailand for 4 years and ran a program there, which was a fantastic experience. And so I'll be honest, I did miss it when I was in Energy Star. We did work with Canada. That was our international work. And we advised and supported some other countries who would ask us questions. But it wasn't, while EPA's mission is to also work on international cooperation, taking something like the portfolio manager tool or our Energy Star certification around the world is just too big a lift. And so it wasn't really something we were ever going to be able to do. So that is, I think, this vision Measurabl has, is that why not take what succeeded in North America and try to replicate it elsewhere where there isn't a portfolio manager, and see if Measurabl can essentially build up that common database. But there are a lot of things that are different. I'm learning right now that the privacy laws, data privacy laws, differ very significantly in Europe. Data privacy is always front of mind for everybody these days, and it's a big deal here in the US. It seems to be a bigger deal in Europe based on what I've learned so far in my short 7 weeks with the company and talking to some of my European colleagues. So there are things of that nature. There's just access to data is very different as well. And what data the utilities can provide. The metering of buildings is also going to be different. So yeah, there are these other considerations that have to be taken into account, and we are knowledgeable about those. And now we have to spend some time working on solutions and partnerships. The other part of my title is going to be a big part of that, both in the US and abroad.
Partnerships with what exactly?
I view partnerships very broadly, to be honest with you. I think a lot of organizations have very specific definitions of a partner. And even in Measurabl, I think, I came in and I see that we have a very specific definition of what a partner is, as opposed to something else, a partner, a customer, some other groups. To me, everybody's a partner, really. Okay, maybe a customer is a customer, but they're still a partner, right? But if you take the direct customer out of it, for me, partners would include a wide variety of organizations. It would include, I think one of the most interesting ones is consultants. Consultants are the ones who work with the building owners and help the building owners figure out how to reduce the energy use in their buildings, how to benchmark them. They, I think, represent a great opportunity for partnership for Measurabl, and it's something I'm looking forward to building, is a partnership with consultants. Nonprofits, both in the real estate sector and in the environmental sector, in the sustainability sector, I think represent great opportunities for partnership. Those may not be direct customers of Measurabl, but they're important to growing this acceptance of a common data set, if you will. They're important for us now having this free solution to help more people understand that it's there and it can help them at no risk to them, and to helping us build the database. One of the things we want to do is, whether people are paying us or not to use the tool, just build the amount of data in the Measurabl database, because once we get the data to be more representative and we have a larger data set, we can offer better benchmarks. We can offer better insights by analyzing all of that data and providing feedback back to the individual buildings that are using the tool. So one of our big goals is simply to build the amount of data that we have. And we only have a certain reach. So we need to partner with people who have a bigger reach, or reach into target areas that we don't have. For example, many of Measurabl's customers are some of the larger companies, the more advanced and sophisticated ones, institutional investors, essentially. There's a whole small and medium-sized building market that is incredibly important and represents a huge opportunity for energy savings and emissions reductions, but they're harder to reach. So we need to partner with people who can help us reach them.
I want to get a little bit more into your role and this switch from sort of public to private sector. Mm-hmm. So now that you're in the private sector, that can be a big shift with the way that you work. And I know that you've only been at Measurabl for just a few months now, but has anything sort of surprised you about the difference of working at like this tech company after decades in public service?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are interesting, and my colleagues have heard me say this. I always viewed the way that I ran the part of the Energy Star program that I managed, I ran it like a business. That's how I considered it. And we had a budget every year that changed a lot based on the priorities of the administration. And we had to make changes based on that, just like businesses do, right? Some years you have a really good year, some years you don't have as good a year, and you have to pivot and make changes based on your available money. The one thing I didn't have to worry about was bringing in additional revenue, or where that money was coming from. the amount that we were given might change, but it was given to us and we did not have the opportunity to bring in more. It's not legal for us to do that in Energy Star. So that's certainly a change, is doing the same type of work, but now in a for-profit business environment. There are additional challenges there, of course. There is competition. Whereas with Energy Star, we didn't seek to compete with anybody. We sought to be that foundation for everybody who is competing with each other. So it's certainly a different dynamic, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity out there and there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of good companies. And I think the best opportunity is for us to find ways to partner with each other. So that's one thing. The other kind of funny, I think, is I don't come from a business background, and just learning some of the terminology and the way that I sort of joked with some of my colleagues, I feel like I need an MBA for Dummies class, but that stuff you can learn pretty easily and working my way around. So I'm getting there. In 2 months, I've picked up a lot, I think. But, I do think that the biggest thing, again, is this, it is a competitive environment, yet I see it as an opportunity. If we can find ways to partner with each other, I think everyone's going to benefit. And so that's something we want to think through about how we can make that work.
That intersection of business and sustainability, I think, is so relevant for our audience at Fast Company.
Yeah.
And you're so right that it's not their primary focus. They have other concerns, but a lot of businesses do care about this.
They do. Absolutely.
Are there any misconceptions these companies have about the building efficiency or this sort of sustainability work that you want to address to get them to care about this a little bit more?
I think, luckily for me, in the work that I do, which has always been really about energy efficiency and some water efficiency as well, there's sort of a win-win. And it's frankly why Energy Star, I think, was so successful over so many years and through so many different administrations. It had the benefit of, when you save energy, you save money. And when you save water, you save money. So if you are a company or a business that whatever your business is that cares about the environment, great, fantastic. I love it. You're going to save money and you're going to help to protect the environment. But if you're a business that really doesn't care that much about environmental protection, that's okay too. Work on energy efficiency because you're going to save money. Work on water efficiency because you're going to save money. And you probably do care about that. To me, I always say I'm not what I would call an environmental purist. Sure, I'd love it if people did things for the right reason and they did it because everybody cared about the environment, but I realize that's not really realistic. So in the end, I don't care if you're a business, I don't really care why you do it, why you improve the energy efficiency of your buildings, just do it, and I'll be happy. The environment's going to benefit whether you cared or not about it. I think it's great if you do value it, and I do work to try to convince people that it's beneficial, but you're just not going to convince everybody. And I think especially in times like today where issues like sustainability that have always been a little bit controversial are now even more controversial, it's even more important to just realize that, look, the benefit's there regardless of the intent or lack of intent. So I think when it's the same we've always done with Energy Star, work on it. It's not going to hurt you, right? And it doesn't have to be that hard. I think everybody has a misconception too that improving the efficiency of buildings is incredibly difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but in almost every building, there's some pretty simple things you can do. It was the focus of Energy Star. Operations, maintenance, behavioral changes. You can have very significant reductions in most buildings without investing very much money at all. You don't have to replace giant systems and everything else. If you want to do that, great, you're going to have bigger savings, but it's not necessary, especially just to get started.
Yeah, what are some of those quick changes, especially for businesses that maybe haven't delved into this a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are just silly, and they're things that you think you don't have to tell people anymore, but you really do. It's turn off the lights when you leave. It's don't leave the door open if you have the air conditioning on, right? These things seem obvious, and to some people they are, and to some people they're not, right? People just don't think about it. Or if you maybe know that you're not the type to think about it, put your lighting on motion sensors, very low cost type of a fix. Change out the lighting from, if you still have older fluorescent lights, which fewer and fewer people have these days, but they're still out there. Replace them with LEDs. There still are lots of utility programs to help pay for that. So these are just no-brainers as some of the easy fixes. And then the other thing is to engage whoever's in your buildings, because some of those things are behavioral, right? If it's an apartment building, the person is who leaves the lights on, right? The person is who sets the thermostat in the winter, in a cold environment to be really warm, and then leaves the house for 8 hours and doesn't set it back, right? So the person is who uses the energy. We have a lot of sayings like this, but I would always say buildings don't use energy, people use energy. And they do, one way or another. It's the people who are either programming the building system to automate how much energy the building's using, or the people who are literally flipping the switches and turning the things on and off. And they are the ones causing that energy to be used. So we have to talk to the people, incentivize the people to do something different. I think that's a core thing that the average person doesn't realize. And what we found through Energy Star is that a typical building can reduce at least 10% through just some of these behavioral changes. And I think the poorer performing that building is to start with, the more savings they're going to get from just some of these very simple things that really don't cost any money in some cases.
We actually get building-wide emails or floor-wide emails in our building every summer reminding people to pull the blinds down, just so that the sun isn't heating up the floor on the weekends when we're not here.
Exactly.
I think translating what that little action means into this big impact of all of buildings' effects on emissions is really a challenge.
I think it is. And, it's funny you mentioned that as an example, too, because one thing we found with Energy Star is people often will do certain things in their home where maybe they are taking more effort to reduce the energy use at home. But then when they go to the workplace, they don't do the same thing.
They're like, oh, they'll figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's just not top of mind, right? They're there to do their work. They're not really thinking about it, and they're not paying the bills, right? So it's not that they're purposely not doing it. It's just not something they're thinking about a whole lot. And one of the things that was great at Energy Star, we got to do a lot of fun stuff too. We actually ran a competition among buildings I think it was for about 7 or 8 years, where nationally we had buildings sign up and compete through Portfolio Manager. And we tracked their energy use over the course of a year to see who could reduce the most energy use over a year. It was modeled after a TV show that was popular when we started it called The Biggest Loser.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's weight loss competitions.
Yeah, we started that. It's what gave us the idea. And we started that up. It was highly successful. The first season, we actually even had one of the trainers from the show was our celebrity spokesperson. And we ran it. We changed the competition a bit each year. Hugely successful. And then we decided to sunset it. And instead, we set up essentially toolkits and assistants to encourage others to run their own competitions. And we had a lot of people do that. We had local real estate associations do it. We had individual owners do it and run their own competitions. And this all just spoke to this idea that a lot of what these buildings did was the operations and maintenance improvements and behavioral changes with the workers. Sure, some did technology upgrades, but a lot didn't. And it was just to demonstrate all that. One year, it was particularly fun. We had a shorter campaign. We called it the Boot Camp. And these materials are still on the Energy Star website. People can find them, where we gave a weekly tip, sort of like the one you just mentioned about closing the blinds. And it would be, for example, if you have the air return vents for your air conditioning, your heating, and a lot of people put papers on top of them. Take the papers off of there, because if the air's not getting through, you're going to be hot or you're going to be cold. So just a lot of simple things that the average person doesn't think about. So it was a lot of fun. Anyway, people can go find those if they want on energystar.gov/buildings. They're still there.
That's great. And in your role now with Measurabl, are you thinking about ways to do that too? Or do you see this sustainability data just becoming just foundational for the future of real estate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we are hoping, of course, that it's going to be foundational. I think it's becoming foundational. And we're, of course, trying to foster that even more. I think the success of Portfolio Manager as being the source of data for all these various laws and programs, everything proves that data is foundational to sustainability in real estate. And now it's just a matter of, I would say, the biggest issue is improving the quality of the data, which remains a challenge. Quality and availability, I should say, too. Availability in some ways is almost a bigger challenge. You'd be surprised to know that a lot of buildings don't actually know how much energy they use if they have multiple tenants in the buildings. That's information they don't typically have. And it's very difficult for them to get. So that's a challenge that remains out there. People find some ways around it, or we work with what we have. But I think it's a battle we're going to be fighting for a long time, to be quite honest with you.
I feel like I've heard that from so many people in the sustainability space that it always starts with data, right? Like it has to start with collecting that data. But I think that move often gets sort of overshadowed by other technologies or sort of maybe flashier solutions. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? Or is there a way for people to just understand this a little bit more?
I think you're right. I mean, when you said flashier solutions, I mean, I've always sort of felt at Energy Star that we were successful, but we also struggled a bit because we often, I think especially in more recent years, felt like we were getting a little bit left behind, and people were like, oh, simple energy efficiency, some of the stuff we just talked about, that's not very sexy, that's so basic. It's so last year. We're going to go with the new fun bells and whistles, the shiny penny, what's new, and let's go do that. But I think that's all great. The newest technologies, the newest advancements in data or software or building technologies, whatever it is, they're needed for sure. But that's largely speaking at any given time only serving a fairly small portion of the market. I think there's a whole rest of the market that isn't that advanced and isn't in a position to leverage those or use that. And a lot of those buildings and a lot of the advanced buildings are still facing these more basic challenges of how do I even get the data? And how do I improve the data and make it better? Amazing things of just like you have the utility bill and it just gets translated into the software system incorrectly. That's a pretty simple thing, right? You'd think with everything we can do that we can solve that. And so we're thinking about that at Measurabl. We're coming up with solutions to improve that type of thing, to improve gaps in data, missing data, things of that nature. That's a lot of what we're focusing on. And I think we're looking at Measurabl into putting a lot of effort on that front so that the insights you get out of the data can be trusted. Because in the end, the insights that you get are only as good as the data itself. Right? So making more data available so we have to use fewer estimates, and then improving the quality of the data we do have access to, I think are paramount for the industry, and they're very much front of mind for Measurabl.
That comment about buildings that might not be as sort of advanced makes me think about, are there these other challenges, especially with Measurabl, trying to bring these efforts globally with just like across markets, if it's different grid systems, different building types, does that complicate this work even more when you're looking at different countries?
I think it will for sure. And, the different grid systems, if you look at the US or Europe, the data availability certainly is going to differ. And then if you go to any developing country, less developed country, you're going to have even more difficulties with those types of things. So the data availability is certainly going to be different. I do think the different asset types, different building types is also a challenge. It presents challenges in reaching certain audiences. Certain audiences are just more ingrained in this issue and more active in it. An interesting example of that is the multifamily sector. I think for a long time sort of lagged behind the office sector in the uptake of energy benchmarking and working on energy efficiency. At least that was our experience in Energy Star. I think it's caught up now, but it was a little bit behind the times in the earlier days of this. So there are definitely differences. I think there's also differences in, again, messaging. We talked earlier about how we have to remember that the businesses are there for a certain reason. There's also for-profit buildings and there's not for-profit buildings. So what about schools, right? Schools were very active in Energy Star, one of our biggest building types. Fast Company is catering to the business world, right? But there's a lot of buildings out there that aren't businesses per se, right? And are using energy and generating a lot of emissions. And we need to work with them as well. And we have to find ways to do that. But it's a very different audience because their motivations are very different, right? They're not profit driven. That said, they are savings driven because if a school district can save a lot of money, they can hire more teachers. They can have better facilities. They can improve the buildings, right? They can have more resources for the students. Same with hospitals, not-for-profit hospitals. The less they spend on utility bills, the more they can spend on better patient outcomes. So everybody has a motivation. It's just not always profit. And I think we always have to remember that. But there's opportunities to work across there. We just have to think about the messaging that we use and how we deliver it to people.
Obviously, Energy Star and Measurabl have made strides with this work, but we still have a ways to go to really make an impact around the world. If you imagine the future 10 years from now, what does that landscape look like? Are you hopeful about it? Are you anticipating anything specifically with Measurabl's role in it? What do you see?
I am hopeful, and I do hope that Measurabl has a big role in it. That is the work I signed up to lead and to try to bring to fruition. But I'll be honest, I think it's important to just be honest about what's doable. Our vision at Measurabl for this global data ecosystem is a challenge. And I think, others who hold similar hope, it's hard, right? It's going to be hard. Is truly the entire globe going to share one data set? No, of course not. Maybe, I don't know, but that would be great if they could. But is that realistic? Probably not. But can we have these common data systems in more places than just in North America? Yes, I think we absolutely can. And I think 10 years from now, we will. And I think the key to getting there is finding ways to work together among all the stakeholders in the industry. And there's a broad group of stakeholders, and that includes the obvious ones, the owners, the managers of the buildings, and the occupants of the buildings. It includes the software and service providers like Measurabl, like the consultants, and everybody who helps the building owners. It includes the governments who pass these laws that require energy improvements or energy benchmarking or whatever they require. It includes the green building programs out there who recognize buildings for achievements. It includes the nonprofits in the sustainability world. It includes the nonprofits and associations in the real estate world. And I could go on and on and on. There's a lot more. Everybody needs to get on the same page and realize we're all working toward the same goal and find ways to work together, even among companies that might be competitors. I've shared the phrase several times since I joined Measurabl, and I truly believe it, that, I think in this space, a rising tide lifts all boats. And, that basically is just saying, look, so right now there's a certain number of buildings that are working on this. We said Energy Star has 350 or 370,000. And I said, okay, there's 7 million in the US, right? Well, what about the other 6+ million? If we can get more of them engaged, there's plenty of business to go around, right? Everybody can still have their share. So we should be able to find ways to work together among all of these different stakeholder groups. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to doing. I worked with all these stakeholder groups in my time at Energy Star, and I'm hoping that those same groups and others are going to be willing to at least talk about how we could put something like this together. And I'm looking forward to doing that.
There's obviously so much to this work, and I do think you have quite a lot ahead of you to make this global and to make a big impact. But I think it's really exciting to see this work being done in such a space that could have a huge climate impact. And this has been so interesting to talk to you, Mike. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on. And again, anybody out there listening who just wants to learn more, please be in touch, and we'd love to talk to you.
Okay, we're back with David, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now, business or otherwise. David, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
Great, thank you. So my keeping tabs is, and I know this is dumb, but I also just spent all this time.
You've listened to every episode of this show.
Yeah.
Dumb is our middle name.
Well, then great, and this is perfect. So I have fallen down the rabbit hole of Instagram, TikTok influencers who review the new crumble cookie lineup every week. and I know that this has been like a thing for like 5 years, and I'm very late to it. But, that is part of why I am fascinated by it, that like this is still happening, that like there's this universe of people who like are there on Monday morning and they get the cookies and then they sit in their car and they do it. And most of them are like, sometimes they do it in their house. Most of them are like very positive and, oh, this is great, and blah, blah, blah. And every one of these cookies, frankly, just looks disgusting. And
they're not good.
They look underbaked and and they have that very like American like chain restaurant problem of like having at least one too many ingredients and just like puts it over the top. You're like, it's just chaos. And so there's one woman, and absolutely my favorite. Her name is Kaylee. She's somewhere in Florida. And she is the only person who is like the crumble truth teller. Like, every once in a while someone will slip in like, wow, this one wasn't for me. But she is like gagging in her car. Like, this is disgusting. And just like, she has like, just a pet rants about like, why do they use the cream cheese frosting when it should be buttercream frosting? Like, just, I love it. So check out, Kaylee Eats in particular is my favorite. And it's just a great way to like, this company, I'm convinced it won't be here by 2030. It will just cease to exist and everyone will forget that we had this thousands of cookie franchises around the country. Yeah. But so it's a way to kind of check in on like, just how weird, like they're introducing donuts soon. And like, they've got like half the cookies are like really like cheesecakes and like just like what is going on? So that's my keeping.
Yeah, I don't think I have any interest in trying a crumble. What's even the term?
Yeah, and they're like 2,000 calories. Like they're ridiculous. Like this is like
absurd.
It's like a full meal.
I'm convinced
and like
it's
more
a
sugar
psyop.
than you should have in a week. And
I'm convinced it's a psyop because it's one. It's like the Apple Store. They don't display the cookies in there really.
No, you go in. You're in like a little thing and you punch in the, on the kiosk, and then they display the cookies to you, and you take the box, and you just spent $30.
Where are
and
these cookies coming from? Where are you baking these cookies?
You sit in the car. Oh, those poor people. The poor people have to bake those cookies. Because again, they make them so complicated half the time that it just seems to break a lot of these people. And you can tell, again, that's why you have to watch more than one of the influencers, because you can tell that like the thing about franchising, in the restaurant business is like, it's you have to get that consistent standard.
Yeah.
Crumble has the widest sort of variance. And there are ones where you're like, who made this? Like, this is just like a 5-year-old's cookie would look better than this.
The culture's really trying to make Crumble happen, though. This is why I'm convinced
it continues to push
It's forcing on us like they're forcing like Cat's Eye on us as a girl group band. It's just like, stop it.
I mean,
Stop
I
trying
will
to make
watch
this
the
happen.
content of people like eating it and like shitting on it, though.
Oh, yeah,
like,
for sure.
It's really just,
I'll follow Kaylee.
It's just the one.
I do. Yeah, I mean, if there are others out there, I'm perfectly happy to whatever. But I do like her because she's willing to tell the truth.
We need truth tellers now more than ever.
That's right. Thank you, Bryan.
Well, with TikTok's new ownership, she's going to be dropped out.
We're going to start with underbaked cookie franchises, and then we're going to go from there. That's where we start, and then we build.
Bryan, what are you keeping tabs on?
Okay, well, I'm keeping tabs on two different things. We could go two different ways here. Because I know, the last time I was on the show, Josh and I had a bit of a rabbit hole down a little show called The Traders, right?
Do you watch The Traders at all?
Is it The Traders?
It's The Traders.
Traders.
Yeah, no, but again, during my gap year, I had to edit a number of stories about traders.
Right, I know Miriam and David, maybe you guys don't watch the show. I don't want to alienate, and also the Fast Company audience. But I will say that this season's driving me crazy. So
It's picked up. I have a different opinion than you. I think it picked up after spoilers for anyone who hasn't caught up. Yeah. Okay, we're back into it. After Mama Kelsey was voted out. I think
now, for those who don't know, so this show brings people from all different like niches
it's
of
got
pop culture.
Bravo celebrities and Survivor and Big Brother gamers, and then some like random C-list celebrities like Mark Ballas and Ron Funches.
Ron Funches was I saw him speaking out.
Yeah, there was some drama.
There's some drama with
who
some...
he was in the house with.
There's
locked
a
in the
darkness
house.
to
Him and
this season.
Dorinda apparently have some beef. Dorinda from Real Housewives of New York.
I've contributed all I know, by the way, on this topic. But yeah, go ahead.
So basically, I feel like the season's not as good as usual, but because my boy Rob Sesternino went out so early.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's the first thing I'm keeping tabs up. But the other thing that's going to be a little bit more universal, I think, to our listeners as well. Okay, so Oscar nominations. So I don't know if anyone else is in the same boat as me, but this happens every single year, right? They release the Best Picture nominees, and it's like, oh crap, now I gotta like watch all of these catch up.
You have an assignment.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. I make it
you
like
have
an
until early
assignment.
March.
Exactly. And
watch
then
last year's movies. Yeah,
like half of these, not only will I never watch again, I will never even think about ever again.
Yeah.
But I feel like this year is a little different, and I haven't seen all of them yet. And I want to know what everyone's opinion is. My movie of the year is One Battle After Another. That is one that I will watch over and over again. I am still thinking about it. And then also Justice for Weapons. I'm going to start a online grassroots campaign.
Oh, I did like Weapons. It's one of my best horror movies of the year so
but
far.
And people on Twitter are like, well, Amy Madigan shouldn't win for Aunt Gladys. Well, why? Because the character's popular? Okay, here's the deal.
Horror movies always get sort of a bad rap overall.
The Oscars appeal to movies that people have seen.
Yeah, exactly.
And
meanwhile, we're out here with Train Dreams. Who the fuck's seen Train Dreams?
I'm just saying.
I don't have the Netflix numbers handy, but not that many. I've seen two of the movies, and that is all I'm going to see. The two popular ones. Sinners and One Battle.
Yeah.
I did prefer Sinners to One
Battle.
Battle.
It was great. It's fantastic.
So,
so basically what I'm trying to say is I feel like this year is proving my trend wrong a little bit, because now I'm watching most of the Best Picture. I was like, man, these are good. And you know what? And I'm very scared for Hollywood right now, because especially the Netflix of it all and Warner Brothers, and I just feel like I'm worried that all of entertainment is just going to feel like a Netflix movie. Did you guys see the thing where I think it was Matt Damon?
Yeah, Matt Damon is the latest to talk about how the notes from Netflix are like, yeah, maybe explain what's happening in this scene, because people are probably just looking at their phone.
That's
we
literally-
just want to make sure that they are able to keep up, even though they're not looking at the
That
screen.
is literally what Stranger Things had become towards the end. It was like, so what we're saying is we got to go get the Demigorgon and we're going to take a left and then we're going to meet up with so-and-so. It's like half of the episode is just them going over logistics. and I'm so concerned that this is what movies are going to turn into.
I think that's a little bit more of a not trusting the audience thing a little bit.
No, they
because
are
people can still
dumbing
pay
it
attention
down.
at home. You know what I mean? Like TV, like there's still like the pit doesn't stop to tell you what's going on. It just moves and moves and moves, and that's made to be consumed at home. Here's an unpopular opinion. I am not really that concerned or care about the death of the movie theater. Is that
it's not. It's
it's
a
not the
myth.
death of the
It's a
movie
myth,
theater,
number
one. And two, I'm also like, this is like the golden age of television right now that's
Yeah.
exclusive to be made at
Well,
home.
we're sort of in
So
the-
Which is why
we're
I'm
sort
so
of
frustrated. The
downgraded
trailers
in
and
the Silver Age, perhaps. But
I think this past year and a half has been one of the best years of television, certainly since the pandemic, but in quite a long time.
so you
I
all
do,
the way back to 5 years ago. We're gonna just forget like circa 2009 Sopranos.
Oh,
Mad
yeah,
Men,
great
Breaking
year.
Bad.
But I think The
That-
Pit, Adolescence, there was just a number of shows this year that were absolutely killer that I'm
Well, you know
forgetting
what's so
off the
funny
top
is
of my
that
head
like,
on the
and I've
spot.
always been very much like I love going to the movie theater. Like I am Nicole Kidman in that PSA. Like,
All right,
everyone
there we
come.
go.
But honestly,
Brian,
this-
you need a PS.
I'm gonna go to the movie. Put me on the Traders. Put me and Josh on the Traders. That's gonna be my
You call
PSA.
the traitors like
Yeah,
you're, like
we're
you're
gonna
somebody's
be
grandma.
Secret
it's
Alliance.
just traitors.
So okay, so but
the
basic-
Facebook. It's
Yeah,
the
the
Facebook.
Facebook, the Google. But what I was going to say was, okay, so I went to go see the new Wicked a couple months ago, and I had never seen the musical, but I like vaguely knows what happens. So is it really a spoiler? So I dare to go to the restroom for 3 seconds, and then I come back, and of course
it's
I
like a
miss the
2.5
reunion
hour,
scene. Yeah, well, that's the other thing with
movie,
my
right?
movies. They're all like 12 days long. But so then I come back, and of course I miss the reunion between the two main characters, and I'm like, okay, but this was the first time where I genuinely thought like, this is starting to feel pretty dated. I could have just watched a movie at home and paused it and da-da-da-da. And it was so weird because that was the first time even me organically as this diehard like cinema guy was like, I don't know. I do feel like something is shifting in the air.
But still at the same time, like I don't think like because it's so ubiquitous at home, and then there's the technology question of like everyone can get like a huge screen TV that has 4K and you can see everything at pretty much cinema quality in your home for like a $300 TV. Like that does change the thing. So you do need to answer the question like, okay, what gets you to leave your house and go see this event? Meanwhile, like if you look at live theater, and part of this is a vestige of like coming out of the pandemic, audience level for live theater, both on Broadway and in some of the other mid-major markets, is higher than it's ever been, ever in history, people going to live theater. So there is like a market for people who want to go out and see entertainment, but the movies have to be good enough for you to want to go and spend and sit in a seat and watch Sinners or what have you.
And I'm
And
pissed
like,
that
there's not a lot of
Alamo-
movies that make me want to do that. And I think like there's some
But again,
similar-
the thing about movies, and I feel like we've so strayed, but nonetheless, is that, one, like the business is not, it's definitely off of, where it was, 2018 and 2019, but by and large, it is not like where like, oh, Hollywood's in trouble because of the movie business. Like it's the TV business that has shrunk, and the money there has reduced significantly in, the same amount of time in a way that, is putting more pressure on these studios than movie thing. Plus, like to your point about, like, Stranger Things is, kind of an edge case in this way, but like by and large, like franchises and things that like endure, like they all start as movies. Like movies are the things that like really create, this sort of iconic characters or worlds that people want to experience in theme parks or live with for generations. And, TV shows like, yeah, that was nice. And then, everyone sort of forgets about it. And so, I think that, in that way, like all of the sort of, movie theater narrative is misplaced because, it's still like driving parts of the culture in a way that nothing else is.
Josh, what are you keeping tabs on?
So I'm going to move to a bummer of a topic, which is the
Way to bring us in on that.
Yeah, we're
Nice
going to
work.
come out on the bummers. The Washington Post layoffs that are upcoming and their shuttering of their sports section and the sort
That
of
does seem to be in doubt, but who
Well,
knows?
they reversed track on the Olympics coverage.
Well, they had already paid for everything. Why not send
Yeah.
the people? But sure.
But nonetheless, like I think a lot of the commentary from former and current employees out of WAPO, I think the kind of the money quote was that Jeff Bezos, I forget, it was an anonymous source, was like, Jeff Bezos does not seem to be a serious steward of the Washington Post. And I think that sort of tracks with this brain drain that you've seen at Washington Post and these layoffs coming up, and like, what does the paper actually do anymore? Like, it just seems to be sort of nebulous, and it's certainly, tapered off a little bit. Now, Jeff Bezos has more money than God and can make something work if he wants to work and change the direction. But I think this is my hot take for this year, and I think it's probably a pretty lukewarm take at this point. But my take for this year is that a major legacy news outlet is going to cease to exist and go under at this point this year. And I think betting money could be on the Washington Post.
Really?
I mean, it really is just at the whim of Jeff Bezos. Like, if he doesn't want to keep doing this, like, people are leaving, they have these layoffs. If
That would be like a
reporting
devastatingly
coming
dark
out of here,
development.
but someone's going to go down. Well, and that's all for today's episode. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Our show is produced by Blake Odom, Sam Gebauer, Hawa Tori, and Miriam Kiparuitse. Editing by Matt Toder. Mix and sound design by Tad Wadhams and Nicholas Torres. And our executive producer is me, for now. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we will see you next week.